What's good, Atlanta? This is the Blog and Dirty podcast, where Dirty Bird is the word. If you haven't heard, I'm your host, John Buhler. Lead writer for FanSided. This is an Atlanta Falcons podcast for the FanSided site Blog and Dirty. Again, I'm John Buhler. I cover predominantly college football for our NCAA division, but I'm also a diehard and tortured Atlanta Falcons fan. Before we begin, be sure to hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, give this thing a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere there's podcasts. It really helps the show grow. So don't need to beat around the bush too much today. Got an exciting show for you guys today, as always. Let's not waste any more time. I'm going to run with this. Our first run of the day is the Atlanta Falcons hiring Kevin Stefanski as their next head coach gives this team an offensive identity. There are mixed reviews about this hire. I would be lying to you if I didn't think that there were. I'm a fan of it. I can understand why a lot of people here in Dirty Bird Nation aren't thrilled about it. I mean, his last 2 years in Cleveland, he went 8-26, but he also led the Browns to the playoffs twice since we've last been there. He won a playoff game. The last Browns head coach to win a playoff game was Bill Belichick back before the Baltimore Ravens existed. Let that sink in for a second. So Kevin Stefanski was doing historic things there in Cleveland for an incredibly dysfunctional organization. I understand it kind of hit the fan for him with Shedeur Sanders. I understand how some people in Dirty Bird Nation feel about Prime. We'll touch on that here in a little bit. But here's exactly what transpired. So I think Atlanta was the third team to have a vacancy open up, following the Titans and the Giants. Those two teams have hired head coaches at this point. We've seen John Harbaugh take over in New York. We've seen Robert Saleh take over in Nashville. And we saw Jeff Hafley take over in Miami. Even though Hafley has not been an NFL head coach before, he has head coaching experience from his time in Boston College. So all four of the head coaching vacancies who have been filled thus far in the NFL have head coaching backgrounds. I think that's very important. You know, it may be the year of the retread, if you will, here in 2026. It became very apparent once the Falcons hired Matt Ryan as their president of football, they were going to be looking for a guy that they could have some level of symmetry, some level of continuity. What I think people have really missed and missed the entire point on here is there were only 2 general manager vacancies open in this cycle: the Falcons and the Dolphins. The Dolphins moved on from Chris Greer before they moved on from Mike McDaniel. And then obviously the Falcons moved on from Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot at the same time at the end of the season. So with there only being 1 general manager vacancy, the Falcons can take their time on this. But there was a crashing sense of urgency to be had at the head coaching department. We saw that, Harbaugh became available, and we knew he was going to get a job very quickly. I think there were some considerations about him coming to Atlanta, possibly Tennessee, but obviously the fit that he had with New York, it made sense. Again, I'm not super thrilled about the idea of him working alongside Joe Schoen, but at least it's probably better than what's going on in Buffalo with Brandon Beane and everything like that. Sean McDermott's now available. Obviously, Mike Tomlin is no longer there in Pittsburgh. So we've had 10 jobs open up. There's only 32 of these, and 10 of them became available. 6 are still out there. As of right now, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, a little bit around that, I think there's 6 jobs that are still open. You have Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Baltimore, Raiders. Those are all the AFC, and I think the other job that's open in the I'm trying to think, is there an NFC job open at this point? Oh, Arizona. Yeah, everybody forgets about the Cardinals right now too. What people have to realize is when it came to Stefanski, he was going to get a job. I think people in the league who cover the league nationally revere this guy. I think he's a fantastic head coach. I would agree. He's a guy, I know a lot of people wanted Clint Kubiak to be here. Well, his father, Gary Kubiak, said glowing things about his disciple in Kevin Stefanski. Obviously, Baker Mayfield wasn't thrilled about this hire, but he's 2-4 versus the Atlanta Falcons, and this is the Blog and Dirty podcast. I think there's some belief that Seattle might win the Super Bowl, so Kubiak becoming available may present a challenge how much longer can you conceivably wait? Maybe somebody out there can get him. I also kind of feel he might be a little monotone, and maybe he's not necessarily a dynamic person, to lead a team. We know that Stefanski can rally the troops. It doesn't matter if Garrett, like Myles Garrett or Baker Mayfield, didn't think highly of him. I mean, whatever. He doesn't coach them anymore. He coaches the Atlanta Falcons. It's a new opportunity. And I think he's probably smart in the sense that, like, hey, I upgraded an owner from Jimmy Haslam to Arthur Blank. Jimmy Haslam, we know he's the major booster for Tennessee Volunteers. That thing's chaotic. Although the Columbus Crew have been okay in MLS, the Milwaukee Bucks have not been the same since he bought a minority stake in the team from Mark Lazary. So let that sink in too. When it comes to hiring Stefanski, you have to remember, you can't be like, oh, we could have hired Sean McDermott. No, you can't think that way. Yes, I thought that if the Bills came up short in the postseason, he was going to be let go, and he was, and I'm okay with that. You got to do better with what you have there in Buffalo. I'm sorry. You can't waste Josh Allen's career. You can't be, you can't have Dan Marino 2.0 in the AFC East. So when it comes down to Stefanski coming to Atlanta, like, he was going to get hired very quickly. What if Buffalo got him and we didn't? What if Tennessee got him and we didn't? You get what I'm saying, right? Like, there were other people out there that this guy was going to get a job. It presented itself very early on in the cycle that Harbaugh was going to get a job, Stefanski was going to get a job, Saleh was going to get a job, and probably Hafley. Obviously, Hafley has connections with John Eric Sullivan, the new incoming GM from the Packers from their time there, in Wisconsin. So, look, you got a guy that Matt Ryan gets along with. They have a Philadelphia connection. Matt Ryan grew up in Philadelphia. Kevin Stefanski's from there. He played his college football at Penn, and I think there's a connection there. I think Matt Ryan, as soon as Arthur Blank decided to make him the president of football, we knew that Matt Ryan was going to have, tremendous say in who the head coach was. He'll have the same thing with GM, and I think Stefanski will too, and try to figure out who he can develop alignment with there. We'll touch on that here a little bit later on in the show, but look, Matt Ryan is the most important player in franchise history. He's the best player. The team was good when he was here. He took the team to the playoffs 6 times in 14 years. Hadn't had back-to-back winning seasons. Took us to our second Super Bowl. Won the peak of Falcons football. He was here, from 2008 to 2017. That was the guy. So I'm in favor of them having, a nice step in the right direction here. And giving the team an offensive identity. Again, like, maybe he's, it's a little bit different here, but like, look, after this past year and the last two, watching just the rampant coaching malpractice on the offensive side of the ball from Zach Robinson, just completely over his skis as an OC. And Raheem Morris just sitting there with his hands in his pockets, not really affecting much on that side of the ball. You felt helpless. You felt powerless. You felt like at the end of games, the other team was going to find a way to win because we couldn't do it once, you needed to make some adjustments. I want a guy who's been to the playoffs. I want a guy who's won a playoff game. I want a guy, the last time I think we hired like a real true, retread after meeting we get it let go was Dan Reeves, and the Giants let him go. And he came here. 97, the team wasn't particularly great. In 98, the original Dirty Birds were birthed. We went 14-2, and if not for Eugene Robinson, maybe we would have had a shot in the Super Bowl versus John Elway, but maybe not. We beat the Vikings, though, which is probably one of the best wins in franchise history. So I'm in favor of this because, like, look, I wanted Raheem gone. I was of the belief that maybe he earned an opportunity to stay and put and get it going, but like, just to see really how optically terrible it was, the Falcons weren't in contention, for a month, and they finished with the same exact record as the Panthers and Bucks in the division. Like, to get eliminated from the NFC South race a month out and have the same record as the winner is just sad. Like, if we would have just beaten the Jets, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But we didn't because we were poorly coached. We got a guy coming in here who, I think he's going to be appreciative of the job because, he took over in Cleveland. And again, this is a guy that the Browns hired Freddie Kitchens over him. And then they finally did it right and hired him. And then they let him go. What are the Browns going to do? Mike McDaniel doesn't want to take that job. It might be Greg Granadinsky, the 30-year-old from Jacksonville, might be their head coach. They might promote Jim Schwartz from within. Honestly, maybe they look at Sean McDermott. They may need to win with defense for the time being. Cleveland, again, This is why you had to hire Stefanski. You had to do it on Saturday because there were other teams out there looking at him. I understand that, Salah might have been in contention here too, but they basically acted swiftly to hire him as opposed to Matt Nagy, which is the smartest thing the Titans have done in 5 years. But I'm in favor of this. I was going to be in favor of predominantly whoever Atlanta hired, just because we got to do something new. We got to get some guy that people out there around the rest of football truly respect, because we completely botched that hire 2 years ago. No more excuses. Let's go. So let's move on to our second run of the day. The two big decisions that Kevin Stefanski has made thus far. And again, there will be more that will come out, later on. I think there's his introductory press conference will be on the 27th. So on Tuesday, I think that's going to come, after some really bad weather here in Atlanta. Be safe out there. Basically where you sleep on Friday is where you're going to be the next 3 days. So just prepare for that. Maybe that's why the Titans got out ahead of it too. I think Nashville is going to get hit with it pretty bad too. But I think they may also have their GM hire figured out as well. But right now, the Falcons opted to retain Jeff Ulbrich as the defensive coordinator. And Kevin Stefanski is bringing in iconic offensive line coach Bill Callahan. These are huge assets for this team. Look, I do kind of believe that Ulbrich was forced on Stefanski in some ways. I don't necessarily know. There may have been some friction there at the end with him and Schwartz, so I get it. Maybe not bringing him here. But Ulbrich has been in Atlanta for a while. He was very close and very tight with Raheem Morris, and I get it. He's been a part of 3 different regimes here. This is I think what's really, really, really important to understand here is we got to have some continuity. The defense, for the most part, overachieved. It wasn't perfect. I think that they went too much on trying to get sacks as opposed to, stopping the run. But there's a lot of young pieces here. There are a lot of guys that really grew this season. We saw Brandon Dorlus do that. We saw Xavier Watts do that. We saw Jalen Walker do that. We saw James Pierce Jr. do that. We recognize that, maybe we should put J.D. Bertrand out there. Ronnie Harrison was a huge upgrade. Obviously, there have been some draft mistakes out there. Should have had Nakobe Dean over the idea of whatever the hell what Troy Anderson who can't play and stay healthy. But like when you have continuity on defense, there may create some sort of friction or fraction, if you will, like within the franchise. Maybe not everybody on offense jives with Stefanski, but the guys in defense, they know Brick. They know what Brick's about, and they're going to play incredibly hard for him. It was a huge point of pride for me to watch, even though this team wasn't very good, very disjointed offensively and poorly coached in some areas. And again, I was dubious on the Jeff Ulbrich hire because, he had been the interim with the Jets. And I do kind of feel like with Robert Saleh, maybe he got a bad rap in New York because it's the Jetty Jets. Maybe, coming to a better run organization, maybe Stefanski will be better. Maybe Robert Saleh achieves all that he can there in Nashville. But retaining Ulbrich was huge. Very, very much so because, since Arthur Smith took over, you had Dean Pease, then you had Ryan Nielsen, then you had Jimmy Lake, then you had Jeff Ulbrich. It's just been one guy after another, after another, after another. And how do you win with that? How do you win where you got to learn? It's got to be a meet and greet every single offseason. This is what happens when you have a dysfunctional franchise where, you hire a head coach for 3 years and it doesn't work in Arthur Smith, and you hire a guy you thought you knew in Raheem Morris in 2 years and it doesn't work. You got to make right decisions here. And I think we owed it to the fan base and the team and the players to bring Ulbrich back. I think the guys out there play incredibly hard for him. And I can't wait to see this defense really blossom. It was a lot of fun. And got to try to win the division this year because Tampa's circling the drain a little bit. They fired Josh Grizzard at OC. It does look like we're looking potentially at Buccaneers wide receivers coach, former Georgia star Brian McClendon as potential OC. That's a possibility too. We'll see what direction Atlanta goes in. Obviously, Bill Callahan, his son Brian, was the former head coach of the Titans, really successful offensive coordinator there in Cincinnati. I think the world of Brian Callahan. I thought he got a raw deal in Nashville. I also have nothing but negative things to say about Amy Adams-Strunk. I think she's the worst owner in the NFL. I think she's terrible. Because at least Mark Davis went to Miami to watch Fernando Mendoza win a national title. I think he means well. I think he's just a stupid doofus, and that's okay. She's just an entitled brat who who gets this job because her dad was a cheapskate. And that's why the Titans have been to one Super Bowl in their 60 plus years as a franchise. They're a sadder bag of crap than us. Probably lose to them next year if we play them. That's just how it goes. But when you've got a guy that knows what he's doing defensively, I think Ulbrich can use this potentially to be a head coach again. And Bill Callahan, look, he was, kind of a not necessarily say a patsy as the head coach of the Raiders. Really weird in Nebraska, but he was the head coach of Bengals head coach Zach Taylor when he played it in Lincoln. These are people that are well respected in the industry, and even though bringing in Callahan cost the Falcons Dwayne Ledford, we all kind of knew that Ledford was kind of destined for bigger and better things. He might be a future SC in this league. He might be a head coach. He's got. I mean, if you sit there and say, "Oh, a line coach can't be a head coach," look at Andy Reid, man. Come on. There's opportunities out there. We've seen this in college football. I mean, Mario Cristobal's a lineman. There's other guys out there that can do this. It doesn't just have to be a quarterback. We got to think outside the box here a little bit. But I think these are two assets where you've got foundation where okay, we know what we're doing on defense. And even though we're probably going to lose Ledford anyway, and again, we probably might have lost him anyway, even if we brought the staff back together, he's just that revered in the industry. You get a guy out there in Callahan that reputation speaks for himself. Along with Alex Gibbs and Dante Scarnecchia, he's one of the greatest offensive line coaches in football history. So be that as it may. Very excited about these two additions. Very excited about this franchise because, the playoff drought's going to end at some point. But on that note, I got to go negative here with my pass. I'm really disappointed in Dirty Bird Nation doing Kevin Stefanski dirty. It's sad and pathetic. I'm going to take a sip of coffee before I really unpack this. This will allow a really good spot for the midway timestamp, by the way. Gosh. All right. We got to be smarter than this. But then again, we're not. We really aren't. People that are, in the national media and outside are raving about this hire because, look, the Falcons hired some guy that he's probably too overqualified to come here. What have we done? Falcons do some things well. They do a lot of things wrong. And the one thing they do wrong more than anything is head coach. The best head coaches this franchise have had was Lehman Bennett, Dan Reeves, Mike Smith, and Dan Quinn. That's our four best head coaches. Let that sink in. There's been a lot of Jim Mora Juniors and Bobby Petrinos and Marion Campbell, who we apparently hired 3 times. Norm Van Brocklin ripping darts on the sidelines, just getting into a tussle, just losing his mind. People are saying some really awful things about Kevin Stefanski. What do they want? They want Deion Sanders to be the head coach of this team. They want Michael Vick to be the GM. Come on. I don't think people in this town understand how difficult it is to win in Cleveland. It's probably the hardest job in the NFL, if not top 4. One of the 4 hardest jobs. If you win a playoff game in Cleveland, they should build you an effing statue. I mean, the Cleveland Browns are the equivalent of the Indiana Hoosiers, and the Indiana Hoosiers just won the national championship. Curt Cignetti was a fantastic head coach at IUP, Elon, and James Madison, but that didn't matter. The only job he was going to get was Indiana. And I saw this out there. I think the guy who was in the same search firm that allowed Scott Dolson and the people at Indiana University to hire Curt Cignetti are in on this with the GM search here. And again, I'll touch on that here in a second. But Atlanta's trying to go through, leave no stone unturned. I do really appreciate this is the first time in the hiring cycle, when we had to make a change where it does look like, we got the heir apparent there in Josh Blank. So, having him invested, I know he's my peer, maybe a little bit younger than me, being in all about this, seems like he knows what he's doing. Again, he played at Elon, basketball, soccer or something like that. Just, we see the transition to power here a little bit too. I'm going to try to say this as delicately as I can. I love Deion Sanders, and he was a fantastic player here. He played here for 5 years. He left for a division rival. Maybe Taylor Smith told him to go. And then he played for the Cowboys. I know we hold him in such high regard, but I think we probably need to do a better job of holding other players who fought and battled through here. Where's the gravitas towards Roddy White? Why are we not giving Matt Ryan as much respect as he should? Jesse Tuggle pretty much only played here. Other guys out there as well. We rave about Todd McClure and what Mud Dog brings to this franchise. We got to do a better job of honoring the guys who dance for the ones who brought you. And I understand it was a different era back then, but we got to be smarter. We can't be just dumb, loud, obnoxious about everything. If 31 other franchises, let me put it this way, if 30 other franchises, let's remove Cleveland from the equation. Anybody I've talked to with fans, anybody I've talked to at work who has ties to any other team, I've talked to people who are Seahawks fans. I've talked to people who are Cowboys fans. I've talked to people who are Steelers fans. I've talked to people who are Chiefs fans, people who are Jets fans, Giants fans. Across the board, everyone's like, great hire for you guys. I'm really happy for you, Buhler, because you got a guy who's really good. Obviously, there will be bad hires that are made in this cycle. Maybe this will blow up in my face. Maybe we'll be talking about why Stefanski didn't work 2 years from now. But I don't think so. Again, it comes down to quarterback play. Cousins is probably out the door, even though I think he does have a rapport with Stefanski. You're going to have to cut him, try to figure out a new salary. Maybe he does come back. If not, maybe you go after a guy like Joe Flacco, maybe a guy like Jameis Winston, some guy who has ties to Stefanski. And while you wait for Penix to get healthy. Look, Penix regressed. Penix didn't take snaps under center. Raheem Morris had the hubris to not play starters in the preseason when we needed the work. If you come into the season, look, even though the Chiefs did not make the playoffs this year, I still hold Andy Reid in high regard. And again, I'm not the biggest Andy Reid fan in the world. I think he's a great coach. I think he's a terrible father, and we'll just leave it at that. But his players play really hard for him. He takes guys that takes flyers on guys that are very very risky players. But he also is not above playing guys in the preseason. Maybe that's just being old school. But there's work to be had. There's things to grow. You have a new team. You got to figure out what it is. Live action is the best action. And even if you have scrimmages with team on team like we do with the Titans, I'm what that means. Joint practice. There you go. It's still not a game, and you got to take those things seriously. And when you don't, then maybe your players get sets in their mind. Maybe I don't have to take the game seriously. And if you don't take the game seriously, you miss out the playoffs by one game and you get your ass fired. We got to give this guy an opportunity. We got to be in support of him. We got to show him, Southern hospitality, that we care and that we really want to win. Because I think he doesn't come here as a joke. There were other options out there. He picked the Falcons over other teams. The Titans could have had him. The Dolphins could have had him. Maybe the Bills would have loved to have him now. That's why you acted what you did on Saturday, because later that day, the same day the Falcons hired him, the Bills lost to the Broncos, and a couple of days later, Sean McDermott was out. And I think if you ask anybody who's coaching or followed the AFC North outside of Cleveland, they're like, yeah, this guy's pretty good. They know what Cleveland is, and he elevated them. Maybe he did the same for us. Let's give this guy some respect. Let's just do the same sort of thing. People were kind of saying that the Raheem Morris hire was mid. I thought he was going to be a connective tissue here. I think ultimately he did not hire a good staff, and I think that's really the key part here. Who does Stefanski hire as OC? I think, like I said before, retaining Ulbrich's great. Bringing in Bill Callahan's a huge plus. Yeah, even though you probably are going to lose to Wayne Bedford, it's a new regime. I understand. Let's give Stefanski. Let's just be respectful here. Let's just not show our ass before he even talks in front of the media. We're better than this. Maybe we're not, but we should be. And let's get out of here with some punt. And I'm going to punt on this. I'm not entirely sure if hiring a head coach and O-line coach before GM and OC is going to work out. We understand why we did it, but it was very unique. Maybe this is something that, I'm going to take a sip of coffee and make sure I can say this correctly. When you look at the history of the NFL, a lot of franchises that have been around for a long time have some stuff that's cutting edge. They figure something out. They're the team that does this, and then the whole league adapts it. But they were the house of creativity, where this idea came from. Obviously, the West Coast offense started out of necessity in Cincinnati with Bill Walsh, because Virgil Green couldn't really throw it deep. He brings it to San Francisco, and there you go. The Buccaneers had a fantastic defense. Offense couldn't do anything. They do the Monty Kiffin Tony Dungy, Tampa 2, that changes the game. We know the 46 defense with the Chicago Bears, Jimmy Johnson with his draft chart. With the Cowboys, you can look at any number of franchises out there where they're doing something different. They're doing something unique. Obviously, the tush push with the Eagles, that's cutting edge stuff. And I'm not necessarily saying that the Falcons need to do that, but they've never really done that. Maybe they were the first team to really embrace a mobile quarterback with Michael Vick, but that was the context of hiring a run first, don't throw a million miles an hour quarterback for a very cocky defensive minded head coach in Jim Mora Jr. But I understand a lot of instances you want to, when it doesn't go well for your franchise, you want a clean slate because you want to have alignment. You don't want to have forced relationships. That's why, if they were going to fire Raheem Morris, they probably need to fire Terry Fontenot. More importantly, if they're going to fire Terry Fontenot, they had to fire Raheem Morris. You had to start with a clean slate. You bring in Matt Ryan. You shape the franchise in this new era, in this new direction, as you see fit. Usually, the pecking order of how this goes is, whatever glorified football executive you've got at the top with Matt Ryan, what John Elway was in Denver, what have you. Then you hire your GM, and together they hire the head coach, and then the head coach hires the staff, and the staff, and then they pick the players. That's usually the line of sequence here. But Atlanta, I think, was presented with a very interesting problem. I think that they knew there was something missing. They bring Matt Ryan in, and then they realized that the hiring cycle, it was going to be a lot of head coaches, not a lot of GMs. I mean, look, if you end up with the second best GM of 2, you still end up with the second best GM. But if there's 10 head coaches out there and you get the best GM and you have the 8th best head coach, is that really going to help you out? So I'm a little intrigued to see how the Falcons have kind of gone in this direction. So, they have a head coach before they have a GM. They have an offensive line coach before they have an OC. Granted, Stefanski is an offensive mind, so that's not going to be as asymmetrical as you'd think it would be. And even if Matt Ryan's kind of more of like a GM than you'd think, maybe that's why GM and OC have been, diminished a little bit more in this hiring cycle for Atlanta, because you have your president of football, you have your head coach, and you got your O-line guy. So you have strong pieces. You also retained your defensive coordinator too. So you kind of have these foundational pieces organizationally, both upstairs and on the sidelines. The players here, you're trying to round out your staff as best as you can. Look, I don't know if it's going to work out. This may blow up in our face, but this may prove to be cutting edge. And I don't necessarily know how many more teams would adopt this if it works in Atlanta, but maybe they will. I mean, there's other things. We saw, 11 personnel with the LA Rams. They tried to bring that here. Didn't really work. The Shanahan zone blocking scheme, that was out of Denver with Mike Shanahan and Alex Gibbs and Terrell Davis running behind Mark Schlereth and whoever for John Elway. Like, you're looking for things where, look, if it hasn't been working, you can't be repeating the same stuff over and over and over again, because that's the definition of insanity. And it would have been insanity to bring back Raheem Morris with, try to find a way with Pistol Boy, with Zach Robinson calling plays. You can't squander these years, man. Like, the core you have is young. It's getting more expensive. Kyle Pitts is a free agent. You got to figure out the 5th-year option for Drake London. You're going to let Caleb McGarry walk maybe if he got hurt. But then again, it kind of hit the fan with Elijah Wilkinson down the stretch. You got to figure out how to pay Bijan Robinson. You got to figure out if you're going to give Michael Penix Jr. the 5th-year option or not. It's go. You got to figure this out. Also, you got Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. Under contract. And then Xavier Watts, he's a day 2 pick. There's only 3 more years left of control for him. I mean, he's going to hit free agency. You got to figure this out. You got to have a guy who's very savvy with the cap and everything. And again, I mentioned OCs. I mentioned, Bill Callahan's son Brian's a potential fit. It looks like Mike McDaniel's probably going to go to the Chargers. If that's not official, it seems like it's heading that direction. I think Atlanta has looked at, like I said, Brian McClendon. Again, I'm not really tied in exactly with who they're looking at OC, but it's coming together sooner rather than later. The next big thing is going to be GM. Right now, it looks like it's going to be 3 guys potentially. Obviously, we've seen Ian Cunningham with the Bears, and then Josh Williams with the 49ers are probably your 2 leading candidates there. I think there's also a guy who's like the under guy for Omar Khan and Pittsburgh. I think Andy Weidl's his name, if I'm not mistaken. That's kind of the new entrance here. Obviously, they interviewed Mike Disner from Detroit, and Brant Tillis for the Panthers. Doesn't look like it's going to be either of them. Maybe that was just kind of gather intel in some way, shape, or form. But we'll see what happens. I do envision that the Falcons will hire their next GM very soon. I do know that Kevin Stefanski is going to be part of the process with this. They're trying to figure out alignment here with everything like that. It'll be interesting to see what the next domino falls, in the coaching carousel. Again, there's only 4 teams left in the playoffs right now. The AFC Championship is going to be New England at Denver. Denver is going to be without Bo Nix, so I'd probably take the Patriots there. And then, in the NFC, you've got the Rams, it's the 6th seed, going to Seattle, divisional matchup. Not ruling the Rams out here. I think Seattle's probably the team to beat right now to win the Super Bowl, but I thought the Rams have kind of shown signs that they could do it. So we'll see. We'll see how that all goes. But yeah, that's kind of what I got to say for today. And this was episode 77 of the Blog and Dirty Podcast. You can follow me, John Buhler, on Twitter or the X at Buhler118. You can follow the show on Twitter at Blog and Dirty. You can follow along with me on YouTube at Blog and Dirty FS. Like, rate, listen, subscribe, review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Anywhere there's podcasts, give us a 5-star review. Really helps the show grow. Again, read all of our content on blogganddirty.com, FanSided.com, ATL all day, NFL Spin Zone. If you want to see what I'm doing on college, check it out there. I'm writing a lot about Georgia, Miami, Indiana, Michigan. That's kind of where I'm spending most of my time these days covering. But yeah, it's an exciting time here. A new era is about to blossom here for the Falcons. Hopefully, it's a good one. Lord knows that. Lord knows that we need it, man. We need it so badly. Once again, thanks for listening, and this is the Blog and Dirty Podcast.